Now we will start with our labs, and the first one we are going to do is how do we add a firewall into Panorama. So this is a two-step process, or like needs configuration on two devices. First side of configuration is on the Panorama, and the second set of configuration is on the PaloAlto firewall. On the Panorama, we just need to add the PaloAlto firewall using the serial number. Note it is a serial number, not the IP address. No. Whereas on the PaloAlto firewall side, we need to configure the firewall to be managed via Panorama, and here we need to give the IP address of the primary and the secondary Panorama servers. So on the Panorama side, after logging into the Panorama web dashboard, the admin has to go to the Panorama. So the Panorama tab, that's the first step. And then on the left side, scroll down to the managed devices, then go to the summary, and then here we will get the list or like the options to add the new firewalls. So then the admin need to click this add button over here on the bottom side, and then this will give the wizard for adding the PaloAlto firewall, which will be managed via this Panorama appliance. So here the admin has to give the serial number, and then note the authentication key. This key will be needed when making the configuration on the PaloAlto firewall side. And on the firewall side, after logging into the PaloAlto firewall, the first step will be go to the device, under the management, and then under these Panorama settings, click this engine sign or like this settings tab, and then here we need to give the Panorama IP address, and maybe if you want to tweak the settings related to the timers, then those can also be tweaked, but as a best practice we don't need to change these settings, as these are the best tested settings by the vendors, but they might need some tweaking based on your specific environment. So once the user will click this symbol over here, the user will get this tab to configure the Panorama settings. So the first one is the primary Panorama server. So here in the first option, the first space, give the IP or the host name of the primary Panorama server. In the second tab, give the secondary Panorama server. Here the authentication key, and then click OK. These settings can be tweaked, and if you want to disable something like disable Panorama policy and objects or disable device and templates based on your requirement, you can disable these settings for Panorama won't be able to push these specific settings if you disable. And once these are done, the admin has to commit the changes both on the firewall and on the Panorama. So now let's log into our Panorama server and add the firewall. So I've logged into the Panorama, that's my Panorama 10.2.2.9, and my PaloAlto firewall, that's 10.2.2.100, and I've logged into both. So now first we will start with the Panorama settings. So go to the Panorama tab, on the left scroll down to the managed devices summary and click this add button. So here we need to give the serial number, and then generate this authentication key, and we need to copy this and click OK. And auto push on first connect. So if we will check this option, then if Panorama will have some settings or some templates or some policies for this specific device, then it will push once that device will or the firewall will be connected to the Panorama. So we can check this option or we can keep it as unchecked. Click OK and commit to Panorama first, So on Panorama, there are two types of commits. First one is the commit to Panorama, which is like making the candidate config changes sync to the running config. So the candidate config will be converted into the running configuration on the Panorama. And then the second is commit to the devices. So that is like configuring or like pushing the policies from the Panorama to the firewalls. We will talk about these at a later point of time, but for now, let's just first commit to the Panorama. So we can see it's successful and done. We can get a view of the various tasks from here as well. We can see commit successful, and it will give the information about some previous tasks as well. Now let's go to the PaloAlto firewall. Now first, let's change the host name of this one. So let's say this is our DC1 Internet Firewall, and we have changed the host name. Now we need to go to this Panorama server settings, and here we need to give the Panorama server IP 9. This was our IP, the key, and I have a secondary server as well, 10.2.2.10, but that's not yet configured, so let's skip it. And we are not going to change these default settings. We are not going to disable these options. So if I'll disable this option, disable Panorama policy and objects, so these settings, this policy and object settings won't be, or like the Panorama won't be able to push these settings to the PaloAlto firewall, this PaloAlto firewall. And if I'll choose this option, disable device and network templates, then Panorama won't be able to push any of these settings under these tabs. So let's say if the corporate wants that these network settings, or like the interfaces, zones, these have to be managed locally on the firewall, then the admin can just disable this device and network template and not disabling this Panorama policy and objects. So what that will mean is the Panorama or the admins will be able to push the policies or objects via the Panorama to this firewall, but these network and device settings, no. So these will be managed locally via the firewall. So click OK and then commit. So now the commit has completed successfully. We can see it done. So once the commit is done, we can go to the Panorama and we should see that it has connected. So now on the Panorama, under the managed devices summary, we can see the device name as DC1 Internet Firewall. That's the host name which we configured, and the model is PAVM, so it's a virtual firewall. That's the serial number, the IPv4 address, and the status is connected. So we have successfully added a firewall for management via the Panorama appliance. So this is it about this session.